It's amazing to me that the medical profession does this because it doesn't match anything about the normal patterns of endocrinology.
Yeah, so your body obviously functions in a pulsatile manner. It secretes on a daily basis. It's not like your balls just blast 200 milligrams in like one big burst every 2 weeks, like Sustanon administration. So guys, Derek, moreplace.com. Today, as you would expect, we are reacting to Andrew Huberman talks about testosterone optimization. There's a lot of good shit in this podcast that is right up my alley. And, you just look in the comments, bro. Top comments. Our favorite juice ed chemist will be looking into this from his sauna. Not from the sauna. There was a heat wave recently, and I cannot actually fucking survive in it. So right now, I'm living in this thing. What are the odds that Derek from More Place More Days will have a video about this tomorrow? Not tomorrow, but fucking close. I sense his presence. The Delt Lord approaches. Rams have enormous balls. Here's what I think the Rams steroid cycle is. More dishes, more vicious. 222, the moment Joe figures out he's been taking 10 times too much testosterone replacement. Yeah, so I've already watched through this, but we're going to be doing a new, like, sort of organic reaction with my commentary this time. Watching this clip before Derek does a breakdown. Yeah, so as you would expect, here we fucking go.
The Joe Rogan.
Got a 1.25 times speed.
The augmentation thing is always a little bit of a complicated discussion, but there's so much that's happening there right now that's really interesting.
Like what?
Well, for instance, sort of back to the topic of supplements, I always say, look, their behaviors are the fundamental layer. You have to do the right things for anything, for sleep, for learning, for sports performance. But then there's nutrition, supplementation, prescription drugs, and then off-label stuff, right? And so we always think about, when you hear hormones in sports, you always think just the raw conversation about anabolics, all the banned stuff. We can talk about that stuff and how it works. Years ago, I used to work on androgens, testosterone and its derivatives, and how it impacts brain development and body function, fear, and also mental states. But there's a category of supplements that are very interesting that for most people who aren't exploring testosterone augmentation for sport, work very well to increase testosterone by about 100 to 200 points. Not, 300, not a tripling or anything like that. And the main ones are two substances. One is called Tongat Ali.
Oh yeah, that stuff's real, huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah, because what happens is the testosterone molecule, it's basically carried in a cargo. So it can be in its free form, unbound form, free testosterone. And everyone says, oh, I want more free testosterone. You want more, but these what are called sex hormone binding globulins. So there's something called sex hormone binding globulin and albumin. They carry the testosterone molecule to the different tissues of the body. So you don't want all your testosterone free. You want some of it bound up so that it can be delivered to the different tissues, including your brain. But if you have too much sex hormone binding globulin, the testosterone can't really do its things, okay? So
that's a bit of a paradoxical statement, and I understand where the confusion comes in, because we once thought, or many of us were led to believe, the higher your SHBG, the worse it is, because you're binding up all your tests. It's no longer freely circulating around to get to target tissues and do what it's supposed to do. And then we soon found out that there was the notion of potentially even hyperexcretion and unstable blood serum concentrations when you have, well, again, we're in the context of exogenous administration of hormones when we're talking about this, because in general, nobody who's natural is going to have crushed SHBG unless they have like polycystic ovarian syndrome, they're insulin resistant, whatever it is. Obviously there are situations of that, but for healthy individuals otherwise, or guys who are using PEDs, like the binding to SHBG of T is what is going to be, it can regulate like how it gets circulated around the body and transported to target tissues like you mentioned. But in addition to that, it's paradoxical in that some synthetic anabolics have like minimal binding affinity to SHBG, and it's not really how they regulate how they get around. And in general, guys who have single digit SHBGs on cycle, it doesn't seem like the lack of SHBG is really preventing them from making progress. And in general, we see disproportionately larger individuals on TRT due to their lack of SHBG and because of their chronically elevated, non-diurnal rhythm secreting testosterone levels. So it's kind of, I can see where the confusion would come in with this, because in general, it sounds like from a health perspective, basically what you want is a middle of the range SHBG, which is easier said than done when it comes to performance enhancement and exogenous androgen use, which is going to drive down SHBG pretty significantly. But yeah, you want it somewhere in the middle. There is definitely an interaction, especially when it comes to testosterone and its interaction with SHBG and getting around and doing what it's supposed to do, where you don't just want all your fucking tests freely unbound And think of all the androgenic signaling in your brain, your fucking heart, everything that's going to be going on as a result of not having a binding globulin to regulate some homeostatic balance between estrogenicity, androgenicity in the body, and having some sort of normal-ish set point.
So Tonga Ali, about 400 milligrams per day, has the effect of raising free testosterone and overall testosterone by about 100 to 200 points. And so we're not talking about full TRT or blasting, or now that I'm always amused on YouTube, they now call it sports TRT. That's when you get above 200 milligrams per week.
Sports?
So this is basically, you've got TRT, which is typically about 200 milligrams per week.
And we say 200 milligrams, when you're looking at a syringe.
Okay, this is going to be two separate things for sure, but sports TRT, yeah, it's like a generally... It's not like popularized term, but it's a term that has been used to kind of elaborate on the deployment of testosterone above and beyond, like, there's some very liberal HRT clinics that are pushing 250, 300 milligrams of test. And yeah, maybe there's like the one hyper outlier guy who needs that much to have symptom relief. But in general, that's like a fucking cycle, for most, like almost nobody is going to need that much. Now, again, individual response is going to vary significantly, but this is just a general guideline to kind of lump in certain dosage increments to make it, an easily more palatable way to understand dosing administration. So 200 milligrams is not really, per week is not really TRT either, to be honest. Like, how many guys maintain a normal total T and a normal free T on 200 mgs a week? Almost no one. It's always disproportionately high. Even if your total's in range, it's at like the bottom of the fucking, between shots, and your free is disproportionately higher. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use 200. I'm just saying, like, the line for sports CRT is definitely lower than a lot of people think. A lot of people think 200 is replacement, when in reality, for the majority of people, like, relate it to endogenous production. What are you producing? 3 to 10 milligrams per day as the genetic hyper elite with fucking golden ball sack. Like, that is your best case scenario with 10 milligrams a day, unless you have like a fucking microadenoma or on your pituitary or some shit. In which case that's, not ideal. But yeah, there are some outliers who do. Like, I know a guy who produces 1700 nanogram per deciliter total, and he has a high free naturally. It's fucked up, but he has a adenoma on his adrenal glands too. So it's, in general, no one's going to produce more than, the fucking reference range in general. And especially when you look at free, binding globulins, like you mentioned earlier, are going to regulate that, roughly 2 to 3% unbound free testosterone level in healthy individuals. Whereas on TRT, and especially on sports TRT, this level is driven pretty aggressively into the ground, not with everyone, but with a lot of individuals, resulting in, 30s, 40s, very high free testosterone, depending on the unit of measurement you're using. That is significantly higher than that 2 to 3% unbound amount. So anyways, yeah, getting into the dosages.
What is that?
So
is that 1,000 milligrams?
So the typical dose of testosterone replacement therapy is 200 milligrams given once every week to 2 weeks.
But when you look at a full syringe, what is that?
So for 1 cc, 1 mil,
right,
that's 200 milligrams typically of cypionate, which is sold.
1 cc, a full cc is only 200.
1 cc is not going to be that much. So it depends. If you have a little narrow syringe,
okay,
right?
But if you have a syringe that goes up to 10, what is that?
That's 10 cc's.
So I know everyone's thinking right now, like, holy fuck, Joe has no idea what he's injecting into his own ass. This guy is probably on who knows how much, but like, I'm sure whoever his overseeing doctor has, told him exactly what to pin. I'm sure he probably, doesn't put a whole lot of additional thought into, questioning what his doctor says he should be doing. So I imagine he's probably taking the correct dose. But I know the comment section's inundated with people who are like, holy fuck, Joe's on like a gram and he doesn't even fucking know it. But yeah, like, I could see where the concern would come in at this part.
It's 10 cc's.
Yeah, that's 1,000 milligrams.
That makes sense.
Right.
So it would be 2 on that, and that's 200 milligrams.
That's right. So, well, okay.
Like,
so as long as we're going down this path,
I thought you were saying like 2 full syringes.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that a lot of people who think they need TRT, when I hear about guys in their 20s and 30s, look, I'm in my mid 40s, and I can tell you that you can get and maintain very healthy testosterone levels without TRT if you do the right things, the behaviors, the nutrition, all the other stuff.
In general, I would definitely agree with that. However, there are definitely outliers, and there are a lot of people who have abused shit and or been imposed certain circumstances on their life that have, extraordinary conditions, which result in, circumstances where they may not want to undergo the recovery phase needed to get back to a normal homeostatic, set point of a 500 total or something, or they just choose to live at, heightened level perpetually, But in general, I do agree with that statement. The majority of people, probably like in their 20s, a lot of guys are going on TRT haphazardly thinking, this is the mainstream, like new age way to be on gear. You got to think this shit through. It's a lifelong commitment. You don't, like, again, if you were, healthy functioning beforehand, you could, potentially PCT your way to a reasonable recovery if you, don't expose yourself for too long, or even if you do, I've seen guys like Vigorous Steve, Pete Rubish blasted their fucking faces off. Well, not, they're like, I don't know, like, I guess in the context, and some people might say they blasted their face off, some people might say they didn't. Like Steve was like, and Pete are pretty fucking knowledgeable guys, but yeah, like they blasted pretty aggressively multiple times for, blasting and cruising for a decade plus. That's basically what you need to know. And they both did a pretty intensive recovery protocol where it took them a while, but they did indeed recover to good natural function, reasonable function for sure. It was like, I don't remember, like a 400 or 500 respectively. Not necessarily functioning at a high level, not necessarily enjoying it, other than the fact, well, they did mention, the laid backness, the lack of, androgenic signaling was kind of like relaxing and whatnot. But, for guys who live, a more heightened level of, performance, mental and or physical context in certain aspects, and kind of going on a tangent here. But at the end of the day, I do basically agree there are a lot of guys getting on TRT haphazardly that probably don't need it, at too young of an age.
Early on. There's sometimes people are have hypogonadal syndromes and things like that.
There's a lot of issues with guys with head injuries.
And with head injuries. And absolutely. And it'd be an interesting conversation to talk about the role of testosterone in neural repair. It's very interesting. But when you look at TRT, I mean, the way that the clinics and the doctors typically do it is to give 200 milligrams and then send people out for 2 weeks and then they come back.
Cookie cutter.
Because they can charge them to come back repeatedly. It's clear that without any TRT, the testes normally make anywhere from 7 to 15 milligrams of testosterone per day.
Woo, I don't know, but that means the shittiest of guys producing 49 milligrams a week. I don't know. I think that's too generous. I believe it is 3 to 10 milligrams a day. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe that is going to vary, study to study. But in general, from what I've seen, normal endogenous production, 3 to 10 milligrams. You're peaking at best at 70 milligrams of free form, not esterified, all that shit, just like free form test, pulsed out of your goddamn ball sack.
So taking this massive dose and then waiting 2 weeks is absolutely foolish. It's amazing to me that the medical profession does this because it doesn't match anything about the normal patterns of endocrinology.
Yeah, so your body obviously functions in a pulsatile manner. It secretes this shit on a daily basis. It's not like your balls just blast 200 milligrams in like one big burst every 2 weeks, like a fucking Sustanon administration. And then you have you're supposed to sustain yourself on this until your next ball sack pulse, like 2 weeks later. This is, a huge failing in the medical community, or a lot of them just aren't progressive enough. Obviously the microdosing and the kind of more, stable blood serum concentrations, even attenuating a lot of the side effects that can come from these bolus administrations, being able to get rid of things like aromatase inhibitors by using more intelligent administration frequencies is becoming more mainstream, but it's still, obscure, relatively so, proportionally to people who are talking about this shit. And this is why you still see the cookie cutter. Here's your test, 200 milligrams. Here's your fucking HCG and anastrozole. Get the fuck out the door. Here's our markup on the medication. That's all we care about.
It's just not how the body works.
The way it's been described to me to do it is to do it with an insulin syringe and to do a tiny amount every 3 days.
Right. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that works. But again, you have to keep in mind, it's also about adherence. So when they're designing these drugs and creating prodrugs with esters, their consideration is also around the fact that people don't want to inject themselves. So despite the fact that it's most optimal to administer a fucking needle every single day and kind of replicate endogenous natural production, how many people are going to adhere to that? Almost fucking nobody. But then when you go to every other day, more people adhere to it. Every 3 days, even more people adhere to it. Every 4 days, even more people can adhere to it. Getting to the longer, more drawn out it is, the easier it is for the patient to want to adhere to the schedule. So this is where these esters can be useful. However, there's definitely a fine line where it can become problematic, where the pros and the cons to laziness of administration relative to side effect accumulation can be, very, very disproportionate. So when you have, people in Europe pinning fucking one shot of Sustanon every 3 weeks or whatever it is, obviously it's shitty, and in the States even some of the progressive doctors, it's like, here, take your test, one shot a week. A lot of guys are not going to do well with that, having a big spike and then a big, a fucking progressive dip until you big spike again. It's not exactly ideal from an aromatization aspect, from a 5-alpha reduction context, from a androgenic signaling aspect. All this shit's, not ideal. But again, it comes down to adherence to the schedule too.
So 0.2 mils, so maybe 20 to 60 milligrams every few days, every third day or so.
Right.
That much more closely matches the normal pattern of release and avoids these estrogenic crashes. And a lot of problems that are layered onto estrogen are actually problems with prolactin, which is a molecule that's involved in milk letdown in lactating women, but it actually shuts down the sexual desire and aggression. When this is interesting about prolactin. So this happens in brooding birds and it happens in humans. They've done this. A study published in the journal Nature, which is our kind of apex journal, showed that when the husbands of pregnant women, because of something, maybe a pheromone, maybe some odor of the pregnant woman, actually increases the man's prolactin when they're pregnant, puts body weight on the guy, starts laying down body fat, presumably to prepare the father for the long sleepless nights ahead, because humans have always co-parented.
Wow.
I'm mostly co-parented. We all know women do.
So is that actually a role of the prolactin though, or is it its negative feedback? That's what I would be wondering, because there's a lot of things that have negative feedback in the body that consequently will shut down gonadotropin releasing hormone, which downstream is going to shut down luteinizing hormones, follicle stimulating hormone production, which downstream is going to result in less Leydig cell stimulation, which is going to result in less testosterone, which ultimately is going to make muscle fall off your frame, which is ultimately going to make you accrue fat and lose muscle. So is it a result of the prolactin itself causing you to accumulate fat, or is it downstream consequences in a HPTA context? That's what I would want to know.
Do far more, but it's
dudes
true.
out there who get fat, don't feel bad.
Yeah,
that's
so
what's going on.
The dad bod is in
real.
part due to an increase in prolactin. And testosterone and prolactin are kind of working in opposite fashion. So it's a very interesting thing, but the way you describe it is correct. Now, for people that aren't getting prescribed TRT but want the increase in testosterone, there are these plant compounds like tonga ali and another one which is very interesting. It's a Nigerian shrub called Phaedogia agrestis, and it mimics luteinizing hormone, which is the hormone that comes out of the hypothalamus that stimulates the testes if you got those and the ovaries if you've got those to make more testosterone or estrogen. And so those two herbal supplements together can give a significant boost in free and active testosterone.
So you said Tongat Ali can give you 100 to 200?
Yeah, about that.
What does the other one give you?
Phaedogia is usually taken at about 600 milligrams, and that can, the most dramatic effect I've ever seen was somebody who had his testosterone down in the low twos, or I think it was like low twos, and he got it up to the 700 range,
Really?
that's an outlier, right? Most people are going to see about a 300 to 400 point increase.
And that's what the two of them synergistically
Phaedogia will actually make the testes grow. It's a noticeable difference. So
Okay, so obviously everyone wants to know my opinion on this. So Tongat Ali and this other thing, to be honest, I've never heard of before. But one thing about testosterone boosters, which is notable, is the fact that a lot of them operate in a way that may not be sustainable long term. Now, acutely, perhaps you get a sporadic bump in testosterone, but what causes a spike in testosterone in general is typically going to be things that cause negative feedback. So for example, even when you use human chorionic gonadotropin, you're using an LH mimic essentially. What does that do? You're stimulating Leydig cells, but what does it do concurrently? It shuts down your hypothalamus pituitary testicular axis, basically shutting down different functions of your fucking brain signaling because you are manually stimulating your testes with an artificial LH mimic. So when you talk about using things like Tongat Ali, which as far as I understand in vitro acts like a selective estrogen receptor modulator, that's going to work by essentially, like from what I've seen in vitro, it's like matching the efficacy of Novadex, which is a very potent SERM, which is something maybe you want to use in a post-cycle therapy context and or in a gyno, reduction / prevention context, but it's not something you want to be on chronically long term because estrogen receptor modulation can result in ocular issues, a bunch of different things downstream that are going to be problematic from a health context. Like just go look up the chronic effects of SERMs. They're not exactly nice. So using this shit long term, I don't really know how safe it is, to be honest. I don't really know how much I'd put trust in something that is modulating estrogen receptors for long spans of time. And this is even when it gets into, fortunately, when you look at things like ecdysterone or ecdysteroids, these are estrogen receptor agonists. So it was like the concern arose around those compounds too. And I was like, how much do they interact with the HPTA? In general, these agonists do not, they seem to have functioned outside of estrogen receptor agonism too, which is notable, but above and beyond that, they do not seem to have any negative feedback with the HPTA. But things that function as SERMs that literally spike your testosterone by causing receptor antagonism, like this is the kind of shit that is not, like in the acute sense, you can spike your T, but in the long-term sense, is this going to be detrimental by causing the lack of activation and response elements coming from these estrogen receptors that you're actually wanting to do shit in your fucking eyeballs and in other areas of the body. Like if you have something that's as potent as Novadex And by the way, like the reason I'm even using this in vitro assay as a kind of comparative, way to describe it is because, again, there's not a whole lot of human evidence to really support its, mechanism of action, really what it does. A bit above and beyond that, Huberman goes on to elaborate on ecdysteroids in another clip, which we will do, where he does use the rodent data as a, comparative measure. So I thought, it was definitely fair to use this assessment of tamoxifen versus Tongkat Ali. Again, I'm not trying to argue for or against it. I'm just saying the MOA seems to be similar to that of a SERM, which personally I don't think is good to use chronically. I could be wrong though. Maybe Tongkat is a lot safer than, a traditional SERM. Maybe it functions through some other mechanism of action in humans. Because again, we're looking at rodent data and trying to extrapolate. And as far as the other thing, honestly, I had never even heard of it. So I looked it up. Phaedoga agrestis. It is typically used aphrodisiac. One study noting increases in testosterone in rodents is being investigated for its potential as a T booster. Not much evidence. Rodent model, boost T. It's been notable that rodents mount more when they use it. Classic shit you see with T boosters. Is currently not prudent due to a lack of study replication in rodents, no human evidence. So anyway, I don't know. I've never really dug into this one, but I will, if you guys want, I can look into it. In general, T boosting compounds, I'm pretty skeptical of because a lot of them function through a way of inhibiting aromatase or binding to estrogen receptors in a negative way that causes prevents negative feedback, concurrently allowing you to get a artificial stimulation of GnRH subsequent to LH and FSH subsequent to Leydig cell stimulation testosterone production, but it's not necessarily a healthy process to be maintaining chronically. You would not, if we were going to do this in a selective, pharmacologically designed targeted way, maybe we just use a low dose of tamoxifen forever. Is that necessarily going to be safe? I would probably argue no. Is Tongkat going to be different? I'm not really sure. I don't have enough experience with this shit, but as far as the mechanism of action, it makes me a little bit skeptical above and beyond using it in an acute sense. In an acute sense, maybe it's okay. Just Novadex and shit like that. People use that all the time for post-cycle therapy and they're fine. But again, concern, just because it's a herb, it doesn't mean it's necessarily not, comparative to a fucking pharmaceutical.
Everybody wants that.
Well, the reason I know about this stuff, people are probably thinking Huberman's running gear out of the back of his car. And that's not what this is about. Is that I do a certain amount of work with military and I do a certain amount of work with professional athletes who cannot take androgen compounds out of a syringe because they'll lose their job.
Right.
Or they've been doing that and they want to come off. And I'm not going to out the organization, but there is one major professional sports organization where, let's just say if somebody gets injured, they have permission to take up to 200 milligrams a week of testosterone.
Soccer.
No.
Shit.
No. But good guess. You almost got me there because I almost countered with the actual thing that it is.
Hockey?
No. Although those guys have the head injuries. So actually,
right?
The head injury thing is a serious problem, obviously. So testosterone has the effects we're all aware of, like deepening the voice, facial hair, muscle growth, recovery, etc. Mostly because testosterone increases protein synthesis. You look at a young male in puberty, it's a protein synthesis machine.
Yeah.
They eat, and they just grow and grow and grow, and they're putting on muscles and they're lean and. So most often they're lean. But in any case, testosterone has some very interesting effects on the brain. The major mental effect of testosterone is it makes effort feel good.
Oh, that makes sense.
And
This is a really good video he did with Lex Friedman, by the way. I believe his name was. I did a reaction to that, and that's actually how I discovered Huberman for the first time. Obviously a very good source of anything neurological, especially. The guy's the fucking man for that. So I did a good, I thought, one of the more useful videos, in my opinion, of unique scientific insight, where I reacted to his clip and I gave my insight on testosterone's effect on stress resilience, on motivation, shit like that. I'll put a card up in the corner. Testosterone makes effort feel good, reaction, whatever it was called. And highly recommend you watch that and, check out his podcast with Lex and his channel if you want to get more into the, background context around some of the neurochemical signaling and whatnot that has to do with some of these, what makes people driven, what makes them goal-oriented, what makes them, different things.
Reason it does it is that the amygdala, this fear center in the brain, this anxiety center in the brain, has androgen receptors. It has testosterone receptors. And so
androgen receptors.
The way this works in animals and in humans as well is that for most species, the males of that
it's just semantics at the end of the day, people can know what the fuck, he's talking about though.
That species never get a chance to mate. Right? So if you think about, I'll probably pick an example where you'll know the exception because I know you know a lot about natural animals and animals that are hunted. But if you think about animals with antlers like rams, there's been a lot of research, believe it or not, on rams. It'd be fun. I'd love to work on rams.
Rams have enormous balls.
And they have to fight for the right to mate.
Yes.
And the fighting is a choice, right? And the decision to walk away is a choice usually. They usually don't kill each other, although I know some of the injuries can lead to death. So testosterone, these surges in testosterone that happen seasonally in certain species like rams or even these little hamsters, the males will rip each other's testicles off in order to fight for the right to mate. So males of a given species have to actually overcome the fear of pain and punishment. And the surge in testosterone is what causes the shift to the willingness to engage in battle. And so when humans are taking low doses or reasonable doses of testosterone, or they're increasing their testosterone, or they're going through puberty, effort and leaning into pain and challenge actually has the effect of making the body feel soothed and good. It's a drive. Just like sex is a drive, or drinking water when you're thirsty is a drive. This stuff is all anchored deep within the hypothalamus. This isn't a cognitive thing.
That makes sense why young men in particular are really driven to hard exercise and sports that are very, very difficult, that require extreme effort. Completely makes sense.
Yeah. And why when people are testosterone depleted, they feel depressed. And when people have a surge of testosterone, they feel relief and anxiety, provided it's in the appropriate range. Right?
Catch new episodes of The Joe Rogan Experience for free, only on Spotify.
Okay, that is the first clip of a few that were really notable that are right up my alley. This is one of my favorite episodes in the last while, because obviously the overlap is fucking significant, and I'm getting inundated in the DMs and the private messages and the emails and shit to react to these clips. And I will be getting to all of them. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. Like, subscribe, check out my blog, moreplacemoredates.com. Follow me on Instagram at moreplacemoredates, Facebook, Snapchat, NotBitChute, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below. My TRT clinic, it's all telemedicine from the comfort of your own home. Get high quality oversight from doctors who know what the fuck they're talking about, and not get the standard cookie cutter 200 mgs of test, here's your HCG and anastrozole, kick you out the door. You know, the standard kind of bullshit that you get at the majority of these clinics that really have no idea what they're doing and shouldn't really even be giving out this kind of stuff. You want high quality oversight from doctors who actually make their living off of the consults from their high quality interpretation of your biomarkers, assessing your diagnostics, making recommendations based on individual needs, deficiencies, imbalances, etc., and having a tailored protocol for you based on your needs, not just because they want to put you on drugs. Like, you might just need lifestyle, dietary, sleep hygiene intervention. That kind of shit may be all that's warranted. You want a doctor who actually cares about your shit and doesn't want to just put you on fucking test. So that is in the description below, as well as Gorilla Mind, nootropic formulas, Gorilla Mode, pre-workout formulas that design myself from scratch. Anything else I'm associated with, it is all down there in the video description below. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.